Hello all, I'm Sai and you're watching The Book Dragon. In today's video, I'm bringing to you my November reading wrap up. November was an amazing reading month for me. I'm just so happy to say this because September and October were not that great in terms of reading. I managed reading a total of 18 books in November, which is a great number if you ask me. It's almost like a dream come true for me. And one other special thing about November is that I did not force myself to read anything at all because even in the beginning of November, I was kind of in a slumpy mood. And I think not forcing myself to read made me read a lot more than I expected. I have 9 physical books, 5 audiobooks, 2 ebooks, and 2 manga. So without any further ado, let's get into the video right away. Starting with the physical books, the first physical book which I finished reading is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily Exarpan, which is a YA contemporary book, but it also has some kind of supernatural elements into it. So I can say that it is kind of supernatural as well as magical realism because there are so many shades of both of those genres inside this book. Here we follow our main character Lee, who's 17 years old, and her mother has recently died because of suicide. And after the death of her mother, Lee is visited by this mysterious red bird which guides her way to Taiwan, which is the birthplace of her mother and where her grandparents are living right now. Until Lee's mother was alive, she did not allow Lee to get in contact with her grandparents for some reason which she does not know now. But because of the circumstances right now, she gets to visit her grandparents in Taiwan and she gets to know a lot more about the maternal side of her family. Now this is a book which has a lot of trigger warnings like death, suicide, depression, suicidal thought, death of a parent, and many other such things. So if you're going to read this book, read it only when you are in a very good place mentally, otherwise it will just make it bad for you. Other than that, I cannot say anything wrong about this book at all because the main concept of the book is how a young adult conceives grief and how they are processing it. And I think the author has done it in a phenomenal way. I started it in the ending of October and I was able to finish it only in the beginning of November, but I'm so glad that I read it and I rated it 5 stars. The next one is another YA contemporary and it is I Was Born for This by Alice Oseman. I managed reading a total of 3 books by the author in November and I had this goal to read at least 2 or 3 books by the author in November so that I can finish reading all the books by them by the end of the year and bring the video for you guys. Now here we follow our main character Angel and she's a huge fan of this boy band named Ark, and in order to visit their concert she goes to London for 1 week alone, getting the permission from her parents, and she's almost 18 right now. She has this online friend whom she meets up in London and she used to stay in their home. What they do together in London and how they get to meet the Ark and all the things that are going inside Ark is the actual plot of this book. I can say that this was really good, but it was not as good as all the other Alice Oseman books that I've read so far. There are 2 things that the author has focused on in this book which I liked so much. The first one is the main character being a very average person but a very nice person. Academically she's not that proficient, but as a person she's a very kind-hearted human being, and I liked a lot that the author concentrated a lot more on that aspect of the character compared to anything else. And the second thing was that how teens face a lot of problems when they are becoming popular, especially in pop culture, and how it affects them from transitioning between young adult and adulthood. It was definitely a fun read for me and I rated it 4.5 stars. The next one is a short story collection and it is Flight or Fright, edited by Stephen King and Bev Vincent. It's a collection of 17 short stories that happen mid-air inside a flight, and it is written by various different authors. Some of the famous authors whose books which I've read before also have short stories in this one, like Stephen King himself, Roald Dahl, Richard Matheson, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and so many other people. Since it's a collection of 17 stories, I was sure that I will not like at least 2 or 3 in the beginning itself because it's not possible to like all the short stories because it's being brought in from different authors. But as a whole, it was a really good book. I personally have not been on a flight before, but I can understand how it can feel for a person who's just speeding through the sky inside an aluminum container, trusting a person to land them at a destination where they want to get. It was definitely a thrilling and nail-biting read for me. I was not able to read it quick also because even though they are short stories, they have a lot going on inside them. It's definitely a page turner and I rated it 4 stars. The next one is a non-fiction book and it is Out of the Maze by Dr. Spencer Johnson, which is the sequel to the most popular book Who Moved My Cheese by the same author. But this one was published after the death of the author by his 3 sons and one of his editors. They polished the story that the author had created and published it just as he wished. Now the best thing about this book is that it is so easy to understand, and it's not like you need to read the first book in order to understand this one, because in the beginning of the book itself they give a short summary of what the first book was about, and the first book is also very short. It's not even 100 pages long, just like this one. I listened to the first book in Tamil as an audiobook and I got my hands on the physical copy for this one. I should say that this was not as good as the first book in my own opinion, but the thing that the author has tried to explain that was left out in the first book was really well done here. In my personal opinion, I can say that it can be much more well done by the author to the caliber in which the first book was written, yet it was a quick, easy and useful read, so I rated it 4. The next one is yet another Alice Oseman book and it is Radio Silence. I reread Radio Silence after I read it for the first time in January, and I should say that this book had the same effect on me even on the second time that I read it, because this is the book which I felt the most related to, and I should say the same experience was repeated in the second time reading the book also. I've talked about Radio Silence a lot many times already in the channel, so I'm not going to repeat myself. So just as the first time, I rated this one 5 stars again. Sorry if you hear any background noise, guys. It's just started raining outside out of nowhere. So the next book which I finished is another non-fiction book, and it is The Courage to Be Disliked by Ichiro Kimishi and Fumitake Koga. Now this is a book which was super challenging for me to read while I began reading it, because it challenged the basic thought that I had in my mind, and dealing with that first and after that reading this book was super challenging for me. But I'm so glad that I read it, because the clarity that these authors have had while they have written this book is extremely brilliant. The book is basically written in a style of a Q&A, where a youth asks questions to a philosopher and the philosopher keeps on answering those questions. And the one thing that the book solely concentrates on is now, and how we can deal with our life by concentrating now. The present is the thing which only matters, and all the other things are untrue. So based on that concept, the author says that there is no such thing as trauma, because if there is nothing else except the present, it means that there is no past and there is no future also. Trauma usually comes from the past, so if there is no past itself, there is no trauma. That took a lot of time for me to wrap my head around, but once I got a hang of it, I was totally enjoying this book, because the authors explained each and everything super clearly. So if you are going to read this book, take your time, read it slowly, and let yourself understand what the authors are trying to say, even though it might take a lot of time. It was definitely a mind-blowing and eye-opening book for me, so I rated it 5 stars. The next one is another non-fiction book, and it is The Infinite Desire for Growth by Daniel Cohen. This book basically focuses on the human tendency of wanting more, being more, and just that aspect of our characteristic which wants us to accumulate a lot more wealth, a lot more people, and so many other things. It just basically dives into human beings from their evolution and also to their psychology, so that we can get a basic idea of why we are having this tendency to want a lot more, even though we are not able to answer the question properly most of the time. I can easily compare this book to Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, but the huge difference between both of these books is that Sapiens goes deep and dives into each and every aspect of human evolution as a whole, but this one just grazes the surface. So I'd say that if you're going to read Sapiens, try this book first, and it'll give you a taste of what Sapiens is going to be like, and it will also make you ready for the crazy experience of reading Sapiens. It was not good, but not anything different from what I've read before, so I rated it 4 stars. The next one is Loveless by Alice Oseman again, and I should say this is the best book of Alice Oseman that I've read so far. It's not my most favorite, Radio Silence is still my most favorite, but personally I think Loveless is the best work by the author so far. I can see the growth of the author from the first book until this one really clearly, because in the first book Solitaire there are multiple instances during which I just felt a kind of bored, and it felt like the author was repeating a lot of stuff just in order to make us understand that this character is this kind of person. But here it was not like that at all. It was so fluid. Basically we follow our main character Georgia, who's 19 years old, and she has gotten into university along with 2 of her friends, Jason and Pep. After Georgia gets into college, she just tries to figure out her sexuality, because she's not attracted towards anyone at all. And the thing is that she's asexual and aromantic, which she does not know anything much about. Her learning about herself and accepting herself as the person that she is the basic plot of the book. And since the author is also asexual and aromantic themselves, I think the expression of the character and the way in which it was articulated was so immaculate in its tone. I think it's definitely a quintessential book when it comes to all of the books written by the author, and I completely loved it. It was just an excellent book, and I rated it 5 stars. The last physical book is The Tunnels Below by Nadine Weil Palmer, which is a middle grade book. Here we follow our main character Cecilia, who's 11 years old, and on her 11th birthday, she gets this present of a small spear from her younger sister, and after she gets the present, she along with her sister and her parents goes on the train to some place, and because of some things that happen, Cecilia gets stuck alone in a train which just boards off somewhere. While her family searches for where she has went, she ends in this weird, different underground world of tunnels where she meets a lot of half animal, half human beings, and the adventures that she has with them over there. It just happens within a time period of 1 or 2 days itself. I liked it, but I don't think I'll be recommending it as much, so I rated it 3.25 stars. Moving on to the audiobooks, the first one which I listened to is Inheritance by Elizabeth Acevedo, which is the latest book by the author. This is not even a full-length novel or novella in any way, it's just a visual poem. Since I listened to the audiobook, I was not able to see any of the visuals, that is the illustrations that is done by the illustrator. But as a whole, this was kind of a disappointing read for me, because I've read all the other 3 books by this author before and I've loved each and every one of them. This was also one of my anticipated releases for the year. The entire audiobook is just 5 minutes long. I felt like there was no point of recording this audiobook because it was just 5 minutes long, and even though the writing and the verse of the author was real good, it did not feel like an audiobook in any way for me at all. It was definitely a disappointing read, and I think it must be because of the fact that I listened to the audiobook instead of buying and reading the physical book, so I rated it 3 stars. The next one is a non-fiction book and it is Immortal India by Amish, which is a collection of speeches, interviews and essays that were written by the author. And I should say this was a really good book to read. I've read the two main series by this author, which are the Shiva trilogy and the Ramchandra series. I have not read War of Lanka yet, but I think I will be reading it pretty soon. Let's just wait and see. The author basically talks about how good India is and how it has grown throughout the years. He talks about various different aspects of India, like our history, like the different religions that we have and the origins of them, how our law supports most people very properly and how it suppressed a few people in the past also. It just made me proud at various instances while I was reading this book, and I think any Indian that reads this book will feel that pride while you are reading it. So I'd highly recommend everyone to try this, and I rated it 4 stars. The next audiobook is the last one in a series and it is Bridge of Souls by V.E. Schwab, which is the last and final book inside the Cassidy Blake trilogy, which is a middle grade series. I have reviews for the first 2 books together from the time I started the channel, and I'll try to link that video down in the description. I think it will be useful for you guys if you want to know and get an idea of what the series is about. Here we follow our main character Cassidy Blake, who's a person that can see ghosts. She also has this ghost friend named Jacob, and the various adventures that they have and the ghosts that they try to save and protect themselves from is the basic plot of the series. It is perfect for children as well as people of any age because it has that good horror element present inside it. Even though it is scary for adults also, I am sure that children can also read it because it does not cross the threshold of children not getting frightened of it. So it is definitely a good series, and I rated this last book 3 stars because it was not as good as the first 2 books. The next one is a sequel to a romance book which I read in January, and while reading the first book itself I was not ready for how good it was, and the book that I am talking about is It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. I read It Ends With Us in the beginning of this year, and I should say that I was totally awestruck by that book because the basic idea that I had while I was reading that book is that it's a romance book, but I did not know more about it. By the time I finished reading that book, I just started raving about it continuously because it was definitely an amazing book. I should say that this was just a perfect sequel for it because the 2 people whom we followed there, Lily and Atlas, are so good people, and I think people like that deserve a lot more good things in their lives compared to the bad things that they go through. It was very realistic in its tone. At the same time, it also conveyed the proper message that it wanted to put out in the world. I rated this one also 5 stars just like the first book. The last audiobook is another non-fiction book, and it is What I Know For Sure, written and narrated by Oprah Winfrey. It is just a collection of things that the author talks about from the experience that she has had on her professional career and personal life over a period of 5 to 6 decades, and I should say that it was a really good book to read. It is just a book which is like a positive boost when you are feeling down. In the ending of November, I was not that great in a mental space, and I wanted some kind of book, especially an audiobook, just to give me that boost to keep on going and doing what I was doing, and this book was just the perfect boost for me. If you're a person who's just looking out for positivity in a very proper non-toxic way, I'd highly suggest you to try this one because even though the author stresses on the importance of hard work, she also keeps on stressing out that it is as much necessary to take care of yourself. It was definitely a heartwarming, light and motivational read for me, so I rated it 4 stars. Moving on to the ebooks and the manga. So I read a total of 2 comic books. The first one is Herding Cats by Sarah Anderson, which is just a small comic book, just goes on tangents and talks about random things that happen in our lives, and it's a cute comic book. The other comic book is Little Moments of Love by Ketana Chapman, which just talks about the life of the author and her husband as a couple depicted as cute comic characters. Again, you can read it very quick and it will be perfect for this holiday season. I rated this one also 4 stars. Finally, talking about the manga, the first one which I finished is the 4th volume of A Silent Voice by Yoshitoki Oima. I've decided to finish reading this manga by the end of the year and also watch the movie that is available on Netflix. As of now, I should say that I'm super satisfied with the direction which the series is heading towards because the 4th volume so far has been the best of all the 4 volumes that I've read. I hope I'll be reading the rest of the 3 volumes by the end of December. Let's just wait and see. But I love this 4th volume and I rated it 5 stars. The last book in my November wrap-up is Mars Volume 1 by Fuyumi Soryo, and this manga is available for free on Prime Reading. I've just read the first volume alone and I started the second volume, but because of various reasons I did not continue on with it. It was a very surprising manga for me because I thought that it was just going to be a basic high school romance, but the way in which the author changed it towards the ending of the first volume just makes me want to read the further volumes inside the series. Since I've just read 1 volume, there is not much to talk about it yet, so let's just give it some time and I'll get into a few more volumes of the series and then talk about it in detail. But if you've read the manga before, please do let me know down in the comments how it is and what I can expect from it. I can see a lot of various different directions in which the author can take the series, and I hope that it goes on a positive direction. I rated this one also 4 stars. So yes guys, those are all the 18 books which I read in November, and I'm so glad that it was a great reading month for me. Don't forget to leave your November wrap up in the comments below and tell me whether you've read any of the books that I've talked about in this video. If you did find it useful and enjoyable in some way or the other, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also share it to your friends. And if you want to get more content from me, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.